Yeah, well, let's dig in. Hello, everybody. I'm David Cooks, and I tell you what, we know that paralysis can take on many forms. It can be physical like mine, or it can be psychological. You put your mind to. And what we try to do is feature stories that go from difficult places to fulfilling purpose. What seems impossible can be done by you.
The idea that Black people can play hockey has come. I was the first visibly Black African-American AA player to be on a state championship team.
It may knock you down, but don't let it stop you.
I was surprised the amount of pushback from our own people. The world becomes a really small place when everything offends you all the time.
Got so much to give, a lot of life to live. You must go from paralysis to purpose. Get your pen and paper out. Yeah, I'm taking notes. Paralysis to purpose. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Paralysis to Purpose, the podcast. I'm your host, David Cooks, and let me stop and thank you in advance for subscribing to our YouTube channel, sharing and liking this podcast, because it helps share the message of our stories that impact lives literally from around the world. I'm excited as always because today I get to sit down and speak with one of the most intriguing and inspiring people on the planet. And that never gets old. You find people that are doing things, you're like, man, that's amazing. I came across our guest today on LinkedIn, and he had a book out called Hockey is for Everybody. And I was like, man, let me get this book. And I didn't know it was a children's book at the time, which was great because I like to read all the books of the people I interview. And sometimes those books are really long. But a children's book, this was not long at all. And it was very good. And he is an African-American who is a hockey player. Yes, Black people do play hockey. And we're going to talk about that today and some of his desire to increase the number of people within urban areas to get involved in hockey and some other things. He's a recent graduate from the Mitchell Hamline School of Law in St. Paul, Minnesota. He coaches youth hockey in the Minneapolis-St. Paul metro area. He sits on the boards of Free Riders, and we had the founder of Free Riders on our podcast not long ago, Nate Johnson. So hopefully we get to talk a little bit about that. Also on the Mosaic Hockey Collective, that's been on Good Morning America as well. And he's a co-chair of DEI for Hockey Day in Minnesota. As I mentioned, this book, Hockey is for Everybody, is the first in a series of children's books that he'll be writing. And we're going to talk about how he got that vision and where he's going with that. And then finally, he also has a podcast. So make sure you do the same thing. Subscribe, like, share. It's called Hockey is for Everybody. And he's a speaker, a consultant. He's a lecturer. Without further ado, I'd like to welcome Anthony Walsh, JD.
David, thank you so much for having me. I could not be more excited to be here. Thank you so much.
When did you first get interested in hockey? Because as you mentioned, I mean, let's just keep it real. Black people in general have not played hockey. I live in Wisconsin. You live in Minnesota. Whether you lived in Mississippi or whatever, that's just not one of the things that African Americans have been involved in as a kid. Tell us about how you got started.
For myself, representation matters a lot. I am an adoptee. My brother is also an adoptee. We're both Black men. And when we were young kids, we were attending a church called Park Avenue United Methodist Church in Minneapolis. And there's this group that is actually still around now called the Dynamites that has a mission that they want to get people involved in hockey that are underrepresented. And so that was back in 1999. And my brother saw them getting an award at church for winning a championship. And he was 8 at the time. And he's 5 years older than me. And he said to my parents, "What are they doing?" And my parents said, "Oh, they're getting an award. Oh, what are they getting an award for? For hockey." And my brother said, "I want to play hockey." And so that kind of started there. And he started skating and playing, and I started skating and playing. And the rest kind of took off from there. And then hockey became really the most integral part of our life up until more recent times.
I didn't know about you being an adoptee, and I want to just talk about that for a moment, if you don't mind, because that's important. Talk about that family situation and what that was like. Were your parents African-American, white, mixed, and how did that have an impact in some of the paths that you took?
My parents, the people who raised me, the people who I call mom and dad and are my mom and dad, are white. They were at a closed adoption. I did not know anybody of my biological family up until the age of 25. And that was because I went out and searched and found them. So now I do know my biological mother and father, my biological siblings, aunts, uncles, grandparents. I know distant relatives. Marvin Gaye is my second cousin through lineage to my mom's side. So that's really, really cool to be able to find out. And obviously with who Marvin Gaye is and whatnot, but just that I found that I'm just connecting to like my past, which is something I always really wanted to do. I had my relatives, and who again are my relatives, but there's something to be said about opening up a book or something and seeing somebody that resembles you, who is your ancestor and who you can connect to that story with.
Can we just talk about that for a moment? Because I think it's very important for our listeners to understand that some of the dynamics of ancestry are very difficult for people of color because of the trauma and the way the system was set up years and years ago, where records weren't kept really well and those types of things. So when you do hear your peers who may not look like you talk about their great-great-grandfather and this and that, sometimes you sit there and you're like, I don't know mine. I don't know who that is. What was that like when you went on that journey and you begin to find out who your people were? What did that do for you?
Growing up, my parents were very positive people. They're forward thinking. And this is something I talk about now. And I'm glad we're on this podcast talking about it. My parents have talked about, I talked about it with them, and I've, given this guidance to other people as well. But that, especially in Minnesota, at least, for instance, like being a young Black person in Minnesota, and it's gotten, again, a lot better as time has gone by, but I'm 28 years old, right? So I grew up here in the early 90s, all the kind of early 2000s. Who were my role models in that sense would be like people that were just of the upper echelon of a Blackness, right? It'd be Alan Page, Justice, and professional athlete, who, again, this is the most, but he is the cream of the absolute crop for individuals of life. Doesn't matter what it looks like. Those are the examples. I didn't necessarily get to see the run-of-the-mill doctor, dentist, somebody just doing great work for the community as a Black person. And that's something I missed out on when having grown up in a community that wasn't of me. And so it wasn't like it was terrible, but I missed out on that kind of representation. And so if you can, right, introduce your Black children to people that are of everyday Blackness, it gives you perspective on your life and to be able to, again, look at avenues of possibility that otherwise might have been out of the realm. I feel grateful to be where I'm at because I do feel very confident in who I am and my ability to now inspire people and being able to make a difference in the world. And again, having positive parents, but being active. And so those things really kept me busy. I went on a lot of mission trips. I found a lot of things that to be incredibly grateful for. And I've lived my life still through that lens of gratitude. And instead of thinking like, why me? I think, why not me? Or like thinking, why did this happen to me? I think that this gets to happen to me because I can't change these things, but what I can do is make the most out of them. And that's what I continue to do when I continue to try and spread those positive messages. And so I think that has come with being an adoptee, right? Like it's given me a wider purpose in my life to say, well, if this is something that has happened to me, instead of being upset and bitter and being filled with rage about my situation that like I could be, because I have friends that are like that and I love them, but you got to try to let it go. I just feel like two things can be true. Life is going to happen to you and you can let it destroy you, or you can let it make you into a stronger individual. And I've chosen that route and I will continue to choose that route and I'm better for it.
The rest of the world is going to continue living. And so you figure out the quality of life you choose to try to have in that world. And that's a choice you make. I find all that fascinating. And I do think that how we are all raised, whether it's with our biological parents, foster homes, whatever, really can impact the type of person that we become. Your upbringing, much as mine with my biological parents that exposed us to so many things, allowed for us to be able to navigate in various circles and be able to be who we are with whoever we're with and be comfortable in our skin. And I think that makes a big difference as you move out into the world and try to make a difference and impact other people. Because if you're not comfortable in your own skin, then you're not going to be effective changing lives. So that's fantastic. And the Marvin Gaye thing? Oh my God, that's crazy.
Thank you. Yeah, it's really crazy. And what's also more wild is that I was in DC working for Senator Heidi Heitkamp at the time. And somebody that worked for Chuck Schumer at the time, she stopped the conversation mid-interview and was like, I have to ask you, are you related to the Gay family? And this is before I had any inkling of anything. And I don't know, I'm adopted. That wasn't the first thing I was told when I got to meet my family. But yeah, that in itself has been a huge anchoring point in my life, 100%. So I originally went on this whole idea because I wanted to know if I was Jamaican. People, they know their heritage, right? African Americans, sometimes we just don't know that. It doesn't hurt anymore because I have the answers to these questions. But when I was growing up, you go to the doctor, a simple question of, what's your family history of illness? And you're just like, I don't know. Reflects on the fact that you're adopted. And now, again, what does adopted mean? Like, people will look at that as you were abandoned, you weren't wanted, or people will look at that as, well, I've had such a great opportunity to have a better life or something like that. You know what I'm saying? So there's many different ways to look about that. But that is, again, a reality that you have to face when you're somebody that is adopted. There is no denying the fact that you are. I remember actually around the ages of 22, 23, I had a couple mental breaks in my own mind about suffering, struggling, who am I, what's going on, trying to figure this out, and how hard that was. And so again, like, knowing that, like, I no longer have that, I've been so grateful. This is why I do what I do.
I had never thought about the medical question. And what a great base to use to begin a conversation with people about life and things that we take for granted. Because I didn't even think about, you go to the doctor and they say, what's your family history? And you're like, and you don't have an answer.
It's probably says your parents' names on it, the hospital you were born in. Mine does not. And I know that information now because I was able to track these people down. Another thing that you talk about, taking for granted, people's simple birth certificate. One of the first things that ever belongs to you is taken from us. It's the first thing in life that you're given is your name and where you're born and who you're born to. And that's something that is literally stolen. You have a lot of people out here who are hurting back to the fundamental basics of, like, the beginning of their life. You know what I'm saying? It wasn't like they were 16, 17 and they realized the world wasn't what it was. No, like, their life, they had their expectations of life shattered as soon as they realized that I am growing up in this world where you were abandoned and you did not grow up with your biological family. And that's an existence that you realize you have to exist. Life is not perfect. That's something I've never pretended, but the world, it's only what you make it. You can only be as happy and positive as you see the world.
I do think it's interesting in this day of identities, the perspective that you just brought to the table about who you are. That's a different lens. We talk about the importance of perspective, perseverance, and partnerships on our podcast, and how that gets us from a place of paralysis to our purpose. In this day and age, where pronouns are being changed, there's a lot of things going on, and at the core of who you are, your basic identity was in question. Like, who am I? Who are my parents? Where am I from? And that's forgotten in some of this conversation in the marketplace. In fact, I don't think I ever hear much said about that in the context of identity. Your willingness to share your experience and how you were able to get to the point where you are now, and still pushing through some of those things that aren't easy to push through, and some of those things that are painful to deal with, but you're better for it. And you're becoming more better for it as you do more of it. So kudos to you. And what a great story. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to get back to the church when you were a kid, and there was a award given for hockey, and your interest in hockey and how you are using that now, in addition to the platform that you shared with us about being adopted. So we'll be right back with our guest, Anthony Walsh, right after this quick break on Paralysis to Purpose, the podcast.
We hope you're enjoying Paralysis to Purpose, the podcast. Be sure to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok at Paralysis to Purpose for more updates. Also, check out David's website at davidcookspeaks.com to learn more about his mission and purchase his book, Getting Undressed, From Paralysis to Purpose.
Welcome back to Paralysis to Purpose, the podcast. I'm your host, David Cooks. And boy, what the first half of our podcast we had today, talking about a journey from being adopted to finding who your original family is, and also embracing your adopted family as well, and having a large family that becomes who you are. So thank you, Anthony, for talking about that.
So to hockey now, right? We hear hockey doesn't include a lot of Black people, a lot of BIPOC people in general, right? Quick numbers, right? You're in Wisconsin. I'm in Minnesota. Minnesota is considered the state of hockey. We bring the most players into the NHL. We have the most youth hockey players registered. But out of all those numbers, so about 19,000 in the last count of youth hockey players up to ages 9, 86% of them are non-people of color. And so when you're thinking about that, it doesn't make the most sense demographically. One sport shouldn't encompass 86% of any demographic, unless, again, there's something bigger going on. That is something that I experienced. There are Black people who grew up in Minnesota with Black parents that play hockey, but you don't necessarily, hear about it. So my start was because of at church. We did see Black people playing hockey, but then my family moved to a community called Edina, which is a hockey town. Then after that, it became such an integral part of our lives, but then also so many other Minnesotans can really understand what that looks like. And so when I talk about my environment becoming a product of me, I've been growing up in Minnesota playing hockey and not seeing anybody that looks like me. I've really wanted to change that environment. And I had a lot of great experiences, as great as it was and always will be. And I still maintain that it is because I feel that way. There was loneliness and isolation below the surface. Fast forward to why I wrote this book. I am in Washington, D.C. My internship in the Senate is over. So I was actually working at a think tank called the Century Foundation. I was going to law school part-time and my life was full. And then George Floyd is murdered. And it was just this double shock. The way I describe that is W.E.B. Du Bois, the sociologist, had a moment where he was walking to turn in a sociology paper, and Samuel Hose was a Black man who had been lynched and burned at the stake, which had happened to many Black men as well. But this was a particular case. He looked over and saw Knuckles at the corner store and what's going on there. And that's Samuel Hose's Knuckles, right? And it was just his world just shattered. And it was wow, I can't be out here looking at scientific philosophies and theories and concepts when Black people are being murdered in the streets of this country I call home. And so I really felt that moment myself, I could continue to ignore these greater existential issues that are happening and just claim that life has been great for me. But I felt that I had a duty. I was compelled. And I felt that because of my background, as we talked about, with being able to connect with people of different backgrounds, different classes, different religions and orientations, all that kind of stuff. And then the fact that I also played hockey for Edina. I had a platform. I had done well. I had won a state championship with a bunch of my really good friends who were white, and our issues were a lot of stuff, but they weren't them treating me poorly because I was Black, right? Other people outside of that. I thought back to how can I be this change that I know needs to happen. And that was to show people that we're more alike than we are different. And so you think about what are 3 things that bring people together? It's sports, it's food, and music, culture, dance, all that kind of stuff, right? And so when you bring all that together, that's the one way to kind of do that. Youth hockey encompasses all of that, to be honest. And other sports do as well, right? But just I was using my own background. We're in Minnesota. Mm-hmm. How can I relate to the biggest group of people? And so I used something that was special to me. And so that was hockey. When you're on a team, you eat together. When you're on a team, you're in the locker room, you listen to music together. When you're on a team, you have a common goal. The person next to you, you want to win that face-off. You want to win the shift. You want to win the game, the tournament, the season. And you can't do that if you're not a cohesive unit and you're not looking to the person next to you and depending on them, regardless of what they look like, to get your job done.
You're talking now as a 28-year-old, and you clearly have processed all of that you went through and have come up now with the approach that's necessary to be successful. In your book, Hockey is for Everybody, you had some interesting times as a player. One of the things that was interesting is one of your antagonists actually became your best friend. I want you to just share a little bit about some of the difficulty you had because you were the only guy on your team that was African-American. And you may not be Jackie Robinson, but you were the Jackie Robinson of that team. Talk a little bit about some of the challenges and how you were able to process those things and still build relationships with some people that started off not liking you.
I know to Jackie Robinson, seriously, for real. And in my book, on the first page, you see on the poster on the wall, it's 42, Jackie Robinson means so much. And also you'll see in the book, you had the Monarchs was because of the Kansas City Monarchs and Buck O'Neil and the Monarchs and the Negro Leagues. But there's a lot of symbolism, and it was intentionally a children's book. I could have written a young adult one or a memoir, but a children's book is able to have kids read it and encompass that lesson, and adults also read it and encompass that lesson. It's autobiographical in that sense. I would get called monkey, the N-word. People would tell me to go eat bananas. They would tell me the basketball courts over there were actually shooting hoops. Out of the 100% of the time out on the ice, 10% was that kind of stuff. Just saying stupid stuff without even realizing like the chargedness of what they're saying. Other people really make you just saying that because they want you to feel that. Most of the time, it would be good experiences. So I hope the book does reflect that as well. You get to see that.
I think one of the things you just mentioned is important, is that everything doesn't have to be negative or critical that way. Someone may have said to you, man, I think you'd be a great linebacker. And you may have been. I mean, like, that would have been like a legitimate thing. Not saying you can't play hockey, but man, you'd be a great this or a great that. So obviously you had multiple areas that you could have gone through and done great. And the thing that I find refreshing in what you said was that you have been able to differentiate and discern between things that are being said from a position of hate and things that are being said not from a position of hate. They may be the same thing being said, but where they're coming from changes what's being said. And that's not easy to do, but after you've lived long enough, you'll be able to tell the difference, and you're able to give people a chance to really show who they really are and not pigeonhole them right away, because then you become that thing which you don't like, and you don't want to do that either.
The world becomes a really small place when everything offends you all the time. That becomes tough. And you got to pick your times that you put your foot down. If every little thing that I heard and was said to me, like I let it just like get to the point, you wouldn't get through your day.
I love that statement that the world becomes a very small place if you're offended all the time. So now you're working with youth hockey, and one of your goals was to try to increase the number of people of color in hockey. How is that going for you? Because that's probably different now, being on the other side, reaching in to pull people along with you. You have people pull you in, and now you're trying to pull people in. What's that been like for you?
It's been good. It's changing just because this is what movements do, right? Nothing more powerful than an idea whose time has come, right? I think that was Victor Hugo. The idea that Black people, we can play hockey has come, but just that when I was surprised at first the amount of pushback I was getting from our own people about we don't do that, and who do you think you are? And what do you think you're a white boy? Just like stuff like that. And it's like, it has nothing to do with that. This is hockey. It's a sport. This is not anything to do with white and Black. If this is what you think, then it gives credence to somebody that doesn't look like us to then want to keep me out of the game as well. That's sometimes hurts a little bit in that sense, because you think about the civil rights movement. It was Martin Luther King coming up to Chicago at one point and being rejected by not only Mayor Daley and his machine, but also the Black power structure there as well, because they didn't want to have people ruffling the feathers, and somebody that comes in that really wants to create that change can be scary. Change causes trauma. Change causes a shift in power structures. When something goes from hot to cold too quickly, from cold to hot too quickly, it shatters, right? So people get scared when things change too quickly, elementally even. But that's just part of life. I've had a different perspective on how to go about this. And some people have been rubbed the wrong way because it's like somehow I am now rejecting their idea or something. I think two things can be right at the same time. So you go around and you're asking, why aren't more Black and brown people playing hockey? And they go, hockey is too expensive. I am doing research right now. I have pulled the data, and roughly 20% of Black people in Minnesota make over $100,000 or more a year. And when you look at hockey players and the breakdown of the families of hockey players, over 50% of those hockey families are families that make over $100,000 or more a year. And so, yes, it's an expensive sport. And so I'm using my platform, my perspective to blow that myth out of the water so that we can move forward and actually have another solution to what's going on. Because the idea, again, that we don't have faces that are Black and brown playing hockey because it's too expensive does not make any sense. People want to focus on finding low-income individuals from the inner city and introduce them to hockey. I'm part of a group called Mosaic Hockey Collective, and we have groups in the inner city that want to focus on those families that do these things, but there's no actual investment in that community. There's no actual investment in that player, in this family. If somebody doesn't feel like they actually belong in this space, we're not going to stay there. I do feel like two things can be true at once. So why aren't we targeting, or why aren't we trying to give information, literature, pamphlets, invite people who are over a certain income threshold, like Jack and Jill groups are out there. These groups and looking at polo and skiing and other high income activities. Let's add hockey to that list, right? You know what I'm saying? Instead of trying to reinvent the wheel and get people involved that can actually sustain themselves in the sport to play, get people involved and excited about the sport that can sustain themselves in play. And then once we as the Black community have a foothold, we take care of ourselves.
What you're saying is, if hockey is an expensive sport, then target the people who right now are in a position to participate in that sport. And when those numbers increase and you have a critical mass, then those who may not at the time be able to afford it begin to see the opportunity in front of them, and you can begin to traverse down that path and figure out how to broaden your net. I think what you were saying is that the old methods in many things are no longer valid, and that we are in a time where we need to think outside the box, think differently, and actually strategically, instead of taking the hard road all the time, let's take a look at the road that's there that makes the most sense to go down. And for you in hockey, as an African-American and someone that's involved in the DEI space, who can afford this? Who can we get involved in this right now? And at the same time, we'll continue to work with those who cannot and bring them along so that it doesn't have to be all or nothing. So many of the things in the area that you operate in, it seems to be either or instead of and. I am convinced that most solutions are and not either or, because either or always eliminates more than and does. And cannot include everyone. Let's just make that perfectly clear. And there's nothing wrong with it. It's not because you're bad. It just cannot. But it definitely can include more than when you are either or.
This idea, again, overnight isn't going to happen. It's going to happen generationally. Again, you're getting brothers, sisters, mothers, fathers, generationally bringing them, which is what we have right now for the community in general, right? You talk to really anybody that is like white and playing, they're going to tell you that it's like their uncle, their aunt, their mom, their dad, their grandpa, they played. And we just don't have that same history. So we have to build that, and that's where it'll change. But it takes that investment up front from our group, because rightly or wrongly, I don't know how I fully feel about this, but we can't just depend on like the white community.
Let me speak to that just for a moment, because I think historically there has been this idea that the government or somebody is going to be there to help lift up the community and do things. Well, if we want to be honest, regardless of political influence, for the last 50 or 60 years, nothing has been accomplished. And we've had all types of people in leadership. And so it goes back to having the pride internally to do the internal work to have the outward results. And so as a community, to totally rely on someone else is just not practical. We all are connected and have partnerships that help us get from paralysis to purpose. So it's not unseemly to say that we need to come together and put a plan together. And there's going to be always someone from outside of the community that catches wind to something that is productive and successful and will be willing to join and partner with you to help move your cause. But if you don't bring anything to the table at the beginning, eventually those who are looking to assist you can become a little tired. And I know we don't have that kind of conversation, because then that makes you sound a certain way politically, because we have to politicize everything these days. But that has nothing to do with politics. I haven't talked about politics. I haven't done that. And so you're absolutely right. And you're spearheading this. I mean, you're dealing with the pains of being a trailblazer. You talked about rejection from your community and rejection outside of your community and trying to figure out, why is this so hard? I'm just trying to help. But that's what happens with trailblazers. Everybody doesn't support you. So I think that you're on the right path. And I think that you have an idea that's outside the box. The Swift Hockey, a Black-owned hockey company. I bet our listeners didn't even think that was possible.
I love that.
Right. And that's not a dig on the listener or anything like that, because that's not in the framework of, or the psyche of this country. That is not portrayed by the media. That you understand there being a Black basketball owned merchandise place, or Black football, and maybe Major League Baseball, but hockey and soccer, of course not. No, that can't be. And so again, you're breaking down some of these things that have just been a part of our country for so long. And as you mentioned, it's going to take time. It's going to take some time. And I just think if you can change just your sphere of influence, and it may just be a little bit, but that's great, because as we mentioned, we really don't have that much time on this earth individually.
And something you made me think of this. I've been dealing with rejection since the day I was born. And because I powered through that and survived through that, I have the strength to be able to talk about that. And now shame, the worst things that I could have thought to happen to me and what I could be scared of, it's already happened. And there's going to be other things, but that will happen that will challenge me in my strength and my faith. But just, I've had a lot of tough battles already, and I've really, wouldn't change those for the world. And every tough day I have a 100% win rate, and I'm going to continue that. And that rejection, failure builds character and builds strength. And you can't have a loss without learning a lesson from that. It's not about that failure. It's about what you do after that defines you.
We got to run, but we didn't really talk a lot about hockey today, but we did. And
this is what hockey is for everybody's about. It's just about changing yourself for the better, for life. Change yourself to be better for society. Let go of what's been eating away at you. Forgive those people and live life with a purpose, because this is about life, and it's about building a confident you and what that looks like.
You're authentically passionate about making the world a better place in your own way. And it's clear that's what you want to do. Before we go, we ask every one of our guests the same thing. The first thing that comes to mind when you hear these three words, I'm going to ask you the same thing. Okay. And the first word is perspective. What do you think of when you hear the word perspective?
Infinite.
The word infinite came to mind to you.
Yep.
And is that infinite possibilities? Infinite what?
Infinite perspectives. And so infinite perspectives. We are all human beings, and we are all capable of being that worst person that you could possibly think of. But your life has gone in a way that has not led you down that path, and be grateful and continue to be grateful, because I am no different than anybody. The only difference is what has happened to me in my life. And so when I hear perspective, I think infinite, because you 8 billion people on the earth, there's 8 billion perspectives. As long as we are procreating as a species, you'll have infinite perspective.
Perseverance.
I think about a seed that's planted in a crevice, a dark crevice, covered with dirt, concrete paved over it. That flower, that plant that will grow through that dirt, through that crevice, through that crack, and go towards that light. And that's where I think about human beings, is that it just wants to live. It wants to grow. It wants to be to the best of its ability.
From darkness, we gain nutrients to grow. Mm-hmm. And so it's those difficult times, it's those dark times, it's those dark places that we all go through, that if we allow for ourselves to branch out and get nurtured and get watered, we'll benefit from the nutrients of that dark place. And then we'll get to the light like you talked about. Lastly, the word partnerships.
It's crucial. It's encompassing, right? Like everything in life has to do with partnerships. I think of the old African proverb that if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. Partnerships are really important. Everything has a partner, and whether that's, again, with life or in business, if you are here right now, you're the product of a partnership. Life is partnership. Without partnership, you wouldn't have life.
It's been really good talking with you, Anthony.
This has been incredible. Thanks so much, David.
I appreciate you, and I know you're going to do great things. I look forward to your next books, whether they're children's books or other things, and the work that you're doing. If you'd like to get a hold of our guest today, you can follow Anthony on Facebook and LinkedIn. He's also on Twitter. His handle is @CharlesJ. That's JAY LLC. Again, @CharlesJ LLC. Until next time, on Paralysis to Purpose, the podcast, this is David Cooks reminding you that your ability to endure is always greater than your willingness to endure.
You can do anything you put your mind to.
Thanks for tuning in to Paralysis to Purpose. Don't forget to follow us on social media at Paralysis to Purpose on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok. To purchase his book, visit davidcookspeaks.com. Be sure to tune in next time for more inspiring conversations with David Cooks.
Divorce is worse than death because at least when a person dies, you can conclude their existence. You can say it's over. Divorce is having somebody die on you who's still walking around.
Next time on Paralysis to Purpose.
His name is Kenneth Locke. I'm so excited to have him on the podcast today.
And it's that when people die, you can tell yourself if they could be here with me, they would. But divorce is saying they can be here with me and they're choosing not to. And it's a different kind of grief because you have to keep reliving it.
Paralysis to purpose.